Well, if you come to Douglas UCC on a regular basis, you know that I'm always encouraging you to find time for contemplation, to find time to be silent. And if you're looking for a wonderful retreat place, we have one right in Fenville. It's the Red Spirit, which our Karen Duffin is the owner. But there's another great retreat house as well, not too far from here in Three Rivers, Michigan, which is known as St. Gregory's Abbey. It's actually a Benedictine monastery. And the monks who live there spend most, not all, but most of their day in silence and at prayer. And if you remember, last year I went on a silent retreat there. And I told you when I got back that there was a cat that followed me around the grounds of the Abbey the whole time I was there. And so when I left, I asked one of the monks, "What's the name of that cat?" And he said, "Oh, we call her Magnificat." And I love that. I took a picture of Magnificat. She certainly was a magnificent cat, but of course, her name is a play on today's gospel, Mary's Magnificat, Mary's song of joy to God, where she says, "I rejoice, for God has looked with favor upon me." So today, on the fourth Sunday of Advent, we're going to put our focus on Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, last year at this time, I told you a story about a friend of mine who, when she was in the second grade, was invited to her friend's first Holy Communion. Now, my friend was Lutheran, and her parents were a little bit wary about sending their young daughter to a Catholic church. Now, you have to remember, this was a time when the nation was kind of wary about voting for John F. Kennedy for president simply because he was a Catholic. And this was a time when the Catholic Mass was said all in Latin. And so my friend's parents were kind of worried about their young daughter going to this church that had incense and statues and Latin chants. But my friend begged and pleaded with her parents, and so they allowed her to go with her friend's family to witness her friend's first Holy Communion. And my friend said when she arrived at the church, there was a big sign, and it said, "Our Lady of Perpetual Help." The church was named for a lady. And my friend said when she got in the church and she sat in the pew, she looked around and there were stained glass windows, and each one depicted a different picture of a woman. And when she looked at the front of the church, there was a huge 10-foot-tall statue of this beautiful lady. And people were kneeling in front of her, and they were lighting candles to her. And she watched as all the little second graders receiving communion that day, each received a set of prayer beads, a rosary, to pray to this lady. And when my friend got home later that day, her mother said to her, "So, what did you think of the Catholic Church?" And my friend said, "I looked at my mom with wide eyes, and I exclaimed incredulously, 'Mom, you're not going to believe this. Their God is a woman.'" I love that story, and I hope you don't mind my repeating it again this year. I love that story because most of us grew up in a very male-dominated church with male imagery. And we had kind of a soul concept of the masculine God. Now, we at Douglas UCC, we have a more balanced view of who God is. But that said, we don't really talk about Mary a lot at Douglas UCC, do we? We talk about her once at Christmas when we bring out the nativity set today, but that's really about it. We kind of forget about her the rest of the year. Now, of course, we follow the Christian lectionary, and Mary isn't mentioned in the Bible very much. In fact, she's only mentioned 4 times. She's there, of course, at Jesus' birth. She's there when he's 13 in the temple and he's debating with the rabbis. She's there when he's 30 and performing his first miracle. And then, of course, she's there at the foot of the cross. Believe it or not, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is mentioned more times in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, than she is in the Bible. Muslims have more reverence for Mary than many Christians do. I think many Christians are wary of Mary. That was going to be the title of my talk. I don't think they're wary of Mary. What I think they're wary of is they're wary of the Catholics' devotion to Mary. They think Mary is just for Catholics. And they're kind of wary that Catholics seem to put Mary at the same level as Jesus and God, and many Christians view that as idolatry. And I think many Christians are also kind of wary of that virgin story. Okay. Now, full disclosure, I grew up Catholic, and as a young man in my 20s, I joined a monastery. And the order of brothers that I joined, they're known as the Marist brothers. They're a group of religious men who are devoted to Mary, Jesus' mother. And the motto of the Marist brothers is, it's in Latin, it's ad Jesum per Mariam, which means to Jesus through Mary. And so every morning and every evening we would gather together to pray to Mary. She was our way to Jesus. Now, I'm no longer a Marist brother, and I'm no longer a Catholic, but I still have a great devotion to Mary, not just at Christmas, but throughout the year. To me, she represents the feminine energy of God. She, to me, is the divine mother. That's how I view her, and I think we need her now more than ever. Our world, for centuries, our churches, our governments, our corporations have been dominated by the masculine. And we need to hear the feminine. Now, Rob Bell, many of you know Rob Bell. He got his start here pastoring a church in Grand Rapids. And now, of course, he is famous all over as a Christian author. Rob Bell, in one of his books, said this: when the female voice is repressed and stifled, the entire community can find themselves cut off from the sacred feminine, depriving themselves of the full image of God. The full image of God is both masculine and feminine. And so I'm so grateful that I grew up Catholic, because we had Mary. And to me, she represented that feminine image of God. But who was the real Mary? If you remember earlier this year, I talked about who was the real Jesus, not the white guy with blue eyes. Okay? So who was the real Mary? Well, again, most of us grew up with this image of this perfect virgin. She was meek and mild. She was submissive and obedient. And all that is a myth. None of that is true. Mary was brave and courageous, and she was a revolutionary. Think about it. Mary was at the lowest level of society. She had a lot of strikes against her. First of all, she was a female. Second, she was Jewish. Third, she was poor. And fourth, she was an unwed pregnant teenager. So politically, religiously, and culturally, she was at the bottom. She was oppressed. She was marginalized. And yet God, of all the people in the world, God chose her to birth the light of the world. And that's why Mary's Magnificat, as Margaret read for us, we in the Christian church have kind of prettied it up. But as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning from Reverend Don Hutchings, Mary's Magnificat is actually a rallying cry. It is actually a subversive song of liberation and revolution. Mary is rejoicing because a new world order is on its way, a new world where the least of these will be first, the last shall be made first. And so she's rejoicing, and she's saying, God's looked with favor upon me, a lowly person. And from now on, generations will call people like me blessed, not cursed, but blessed. She says, God will pull down the mighty from their thrones and will lift up the lowly. God will fill the hungry with good things, and the rich God will send away empty. That's what she's proclaiming there, a song of revolution. God chose a dark-skinned, poor, unwed pregnant teenager to proclaim this revolution, to birth this new kingdom. It's amazing. And that is why I see the spirit of Mary today in Malala Yousafzai, the young Muslim woman from Pakistan who was shot by the Taliban. She was an activist who was trying to empower young women like herself. And she was being silenced by a male-dominated culture in her country. And I see the spirit of Mary today in all of the women who are bravely telling their stories this year with the Me Too and Time's Up movement. They are courageously speaking their truth after years of being silenced by men in power. And I see the spirit of Mary today, right now, in those young migrant mothers at the border. They themselves, like Mary was herself, they're refugees. Mary was a refugee. They're fleeing their homeland so that they can find a safe haven for their children. So Mary is alive now. The feminine is coming to the forefront now. We have seen it this year alone in 2018. We need Mary now more than ever. She is not just for Catholics, so call upon her, feel her spirit. The Christian author Ryan Kuja, who wrote a book last year called From the Inside Out, he rewrote Mary's Magnificat in modern language for today. And here is what he came up with. I can't contain my excitement about this. Out of all the people, God noticed me, a poor pregnant teenager. Everyone will call people like me blessed from now on. God's love is so much greater than I can even imagine. God shows love for everyone, even people like me who society despises. The LGBTQ community, immigrants, refugees, the addicted and the shamed. God knows that Black lives matter, that refugees and immigrants are God's beloved. All the people who are seen as less than, God knows and God loves. God lifts up those who are preyed upon by corrupt politicians. The hungry, the ones brutalized by the police and the immigration and customs agents, the families without health care. God invites each of us to the table to speak and to tell our story, to be heard and to be known. The power-hungry perpetrators who care only about their agendas will not have the last word. I can sense God's presence holding me and all God's children close, faithfully liberating us all, just as God has promised. That is the power of Mary's Magnificat. That's what she is proclaiming. And here's the good news. God's plan continues in us. The baby Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. The Christmas story is about that being birthed in us, the Christ light. So we, like Mary, are to give birth to that light. So that's what Advent has been all about these 4 weeks, is we are preparing ourselves to bear the Christ light, to nurture it within ourselves so that we can give birth to it. We are living in a time of great darkness. The world needs our light. And it's why we celebrate Christmas during the winter solstice. Because at the darkest time of year, we're focusing on the light. So my hope is between now and Christmas, I know it's only a few days, but I hope that you will find time to spend time alone with Mary and to rejoice as she did with the good news that God has chosen you, yes, you, to give birth to the Christ light. And I invite you throughout the year, throughout 2019, to make Mary a part of your spiritual practice. You don't have to be afraid. She's not just for Catholics. She's for all of us. And all of us are here to magnify God's love and God's light. Let us shine that light, not just at Christmas, but throughout the coming year. Let us shine that light in a world of darkness. Let us shine that light for all the world to see. Namaste.